This is video 91 of 101. This video is about social issues. 100 years ago, travel was a pretty big deal. If you were trying to cross a country, doing that would probably take you about a month. You would be a completely different person along the way. You probably lost people along the way. You probably birthed people along the way. It was honestly a mission and a half. But obviously technology has advanced, and so we're able to travel with planes and trains and cars, and it's pretty quick to get around the world, and honestly, like, in a day you could be on the other side of the country, and that is an incredible feat. So let's just go back a little bit to when humanity was in tribes, and we basically were in small communities, and that was where we existed, and we didn't really interact with anybody else outside of that tribe. And so anybody who would come, let's say, wandering through the forest and looked different, they would be perceived as a threat because they were unknown, and in nature everything that's unknown could be potentially dangerous to you. I believe this is probably where racism stems from, is the fact that people who look different than us, we are perceiving them as a threat immediately. But the thing is that we don't live in tribes anymore. We don't live in these isolated communities. We are aware of everybody else in the world, and honestly, we're all just kind of trying to live a good life. We need to realize that now racism is completely irrelevant. Hardly anybody lives in a world like that anymore, and we shouldn't be blocking people out because of things that they can't control based on their skin color or their dialect or their cultural traits. It's not something that they can control. And so if we're ever going to decide whether a person is, someone we want to start a conversation with, stop interacting with, or continue interacting with, we need to be basing it on things that that person can actually control, like their actions. We like to look at people and say, okay, you are embodying this cultural trait that I'm associating with this whole big stereotype, and I don't agree with that stereotype, or I don't agree with one part of that stereotype, even though you probably aren't educated about that stereotype or culture, in general, and now you're associating with that person and then immediately just dismissing them. That is so wrong. Or being afraid of these people. Like, just because, some people have done things and they have traits that are related to other people, it doesn't mean that any of that's correlated in any way at all. We need to be basing these kind of perspectives on people based on their actual actions. When we do create these judgments or perspectives on people, they can't be concrete, because honestly people are so fluid and they change so much. Like, if you met me a year ago, you haven't met me, because I change every single day. So we need to realize that, hey, if you see some person running around on the street and whatever, maybe they're just having a bad day, but that doesn't mean that they're a bad person. That doesn't mean that they're a crazy person. Maybe they're just having a really crazy day and they needed to run around on the street. So we need to be realizing that, like, all these people, like, the things that they can't control, we can't be judging them on that, because 90% of the stuff that's probably in your house probably came from another country. So why are we okay with that, but we're not okay with other people from other countries? Because there's nothing wrong with other people, like, from other countries. They are different, they look different, they probably have different cultural traits, but we shouldn't be afraid of that. In no way does that have any negative connotation. Actually, pretty much all religions in the world are all based upon the same principles of just being a good person, loving yourself and loving the people around you, and not doing any harm. That's pretty much the basis of all religions. Any kind of religious prejudice or racial prejudice, or even sexual prejudice, I'm so blessed that, like, I only came out a few months ago, but I have never experienced any kind of homophobic comments directed to me, except one, but I don't think they realized what they were saying, maybe, whatever. I'm really blessed in that sense, but for a lot of people, it's been completely different. But we need to realize that, your sexual orientation, the color of your skin, your dialect, or your cultural traits are things that we cannot control. So they should in no way ever be the basis of your perception of a person. Especially, your appearance is two things you can't control and things you can control. But the way that we outwardly dress or present ourselves to the world doesn't necessarily mean that's who we are. Sometimes it's not really an accurate representation of ourselves. When I go out, I like to just dress as absolutely anonymous and neutral as possible. I like to just kind of draw as little attention to myself as absolutely possible. If I could walk around with an invisibility cloak, that would be awesome, but that's, we're not Harry Potter, so that's my thing. And if someone just saw me at face value, they'd be like, oh, she's probably really boring or really mean or just really quiet or really shy. But then they would be missing out on how awesome of a person I am, because that's not me at all. That's just the protection mechanism I have when I go out in public, because you never know who you're going to meet in public, and I just kind of like to be as anonymous as possible these days. we can't be judging people based on things that they can't control, and especially just like the way that they dress. Like, you can't just say, oh, okay, that person has bright pink hair and I associate that with rebellion and the punk era, so therefore I'm dismissing that person. What if they just really like pink? You have no idea the reasons behind why someone does what they do, so you can't even use that to make a perspective on them. You have to really get to know that person. And maybe you see someone wearing like all black, totally neutral, just like pissed off. Maybe they had a really shitty day, or maybe everything they own is dirty and that's the only thing that they have and they're really pissed about wearing black because they love color. Or maybe they just spilled something all over their clothes and now this is the only thing that they had in their trunk to wear. Like, you literally have no idea what's going on in people's heads when you just look at them face value. So we should not ever be making a judgment based on that. We need to really be getting to know a person, whether we can decide like, okay, like, yeah, this is a person I really want to get to know, or you know what, maybe this isn't a compatible thing, I'm gonna just dismiss this and walk away. But at least then we have a factual basis to make this perspective off of, instead of just face value, because face value, we never know. It's hard to know. It's almost impossible to know, especially if you're just basing it off of things that they can't control, like where they were born, or what their color of their skin is, or what their sexual orientation is. People can't control that stuff. So why are we judging them based on that? Because clearly, as humanity, we are all such individual people nowadays that we aren't related. Like, just because someone's gay doesn't mean that they are related to this whole stereotype of being gay that you may disagree with, but even so, that's kind of ridiculous because you don't have to be a part of that. There's just absolutely no place for that in 2016 and in the future, because everyone is an individual and they are choosing whichever cultural traits that they want to have, and no one is kind of forcing them. In most developed countries, no one is forcing them to be any certain kind of person. So, you know, pick and choose the traits that you want in your life based on whatever kind of things you identify with. We can dress the way we want based on kind of like protection mechanisms, basically, and we can travel and we can go wherever we want in the world too. So because of all these facts, we cannot be basing judgments based on the way someone looks. You need to have concrete facts if you want to make a perception about somebody, and sometimes it may take a little bit of time to actually like get to know that person, but I mean, usually you can kind of be intuitive, and once you start to talk to that person or something, you can be like, okay, like, based on their actions, based on the way that they speak, I can say like, yeah, I definitely want to continue this conversation, or you know what, maybe it's just not working and like I'm gonna walk away. And it's totally fine if you meet someone and it just doesn't mean that they're a bad person, but you just don't click. Like, totally fine, you don't have to waste your time with that, but don't just dismiss someone the first second you meet them based on the way that they look, because that's kind of ignorant. In 2016, the way someone looks is no longer perceived as a threat, and if you are living in that world still, well, you're about 500 years behind, maybe even 1,000 years behind. My history's probably a little bit off with that, but basically, we can't be doing that anymore because it's closing ourselves off from some incredible people. Who knows who you could meet once you just open yourself up to the entire world. And yeah, of course, there are still dangerous people and there's still people who are negative out there, but we're going to be able to tell who those people are based on their actions, and that is how we're going to be able to avoid them. Like, in Vancouver, there's a lot of homeless people, but they look a little bit dirty. Obviously, they're living on the streets, their clothes are tattered or worn or whatever, they just look a little bit worn out, but that doesn't mean that they're a bad person. I've had some really great conversations, and some of these people are so sweet. I'd never know that if I just based on what they look like right up from the get-go. Like, I would have missed out on so many incredible relationships and friendships if I had just based it on what that person looked like. Then I remember even back in high school when I was dating like guys, and people were like, oh, like, he's too ugly for you, whatever. It's like, well, no, but he's a great person, and that's why I connect with that person, not because of the way that they look. I don't give a shit about what people look like. I just care about who they are as a person. And if we all really start to embody that, I think we will get rid of a lot of just prejudice and racism, and all of this stuff is just terrible to have. It's so toxic. So why do we still have it? Like, come on, let's get rid of it. We know why it was there, but clearly we're not living in tribes of 150 people anymore, okay? Now we're living in big cities where there are millions of people around. We can't be afraid of someone just because they look different anymore. That's just not the way the world works. And we've progressed as a community, we've progressed as a culture, as a race, human race. So this is something we really need to leave behind, you know, with like dying at 30 and scurvy and all those things. We've left a lot of things behind, and this is one of them we really need to leave behind as well.